Hi, and welcome to UCLA Connections, Conversations to Build Community and Foster Resilience. I'm Natalie Masuoka, Associate Professor of Political Science and Chair of the Asian American Studies Department. Thank you for our audience members who contributed questions when you registered. We've made an attempt to incorporate as many of them in our conversation today. And today I'm going to be joined by Lizette Mata, Deputy Secretary of State of the Office of California Secretary of State Alex Padilla, and we'll be discussing the importance of civic engagement and turnout. Welcome, Lizette.
Oh, there I am. Hello.
Hi there, welcome. So Lizette, today we're really lucky to have this conversation in preparation for our election in November. So I think, the first thing we want to talk about, of course, is, why is it important to vote? And I think especially since we want to focus our conversation here on thinking specifically about communities of color in recognition of Latino Heritage Month, what are some of the particular concerns when we are thinking about Latino communities, but I think communities of color more generally.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And speaking about something that's very near and dear to our heart, it feels like we're living and breathing this on my end. But I'm hoping that through this conversation, you will also be able to carry it to your friends and your family and your neighbors and share it as broadly because we need all your help to get this information out and to ensure that we have a historic showing and people participating in our democracy and specifically in this general election. I've been asked quite a bit, why is it important to vote and why is it important to participate? In fact, I think I had this conversation over coffee with a family member this weekend. So I'm definitely familiar, and I will share why it's important for me. So I'm the Deputy Secretary of State for Operations, and our role is to oversee elections in California, to work with counties to ensure that they have everything they need to be able to provide a safe, secure election process and that people can participate safely leading into this general election. COVID has presented a new challenge for us in that we are anticipating and expecting that people will be participating in record numbers through sending in their ballots. And I would certainly encourage you, if you are in one of those high risk populations, to ensure that you exercise your right by making sure you send in your ballot. As to why is it important for me? And not only is it my day job, but I will share a little bit about my experience growing up. So I grew up in Stockton, California, and I'm the eldest of four. My parents are immigrants from Mexico, and growing up, I grew up in a very in a farm working community, and in which some of the policies that I saw, including the inability to have access to a driver's license if you were undocumented, really hindered and it also scared a lot of my community members, my aunts and uncles, many people who were just trying to get to work, take their kids to school. I grew up seeing how just not having something like that, something that we take for granted really as Americans and as residents of California, we take for granted the ability to be able to just simply go out and get a license through the DMV. And I think that's just one example of the many as I grew up of also seeing my parents struggle to receive assistance through translation services because English was not their first language. And I realized that as I grew older, that there were things that you can do, that as an active participant in our democracy, that one of the very first things that you can do is vote. As vote, because you can and you can vote to change things at the local level and at the state level and at the federal level. So if you see something, for me, growing up in a community, I got to see a lot of things that I felt were inequitable, a lot of things that I felt could be better. And that's also why I went to public service, because I genuinely believe that we can make things better for our communities and for our families and for our future in general. And so it's with that lens that I came in to do my job. But when asked why is it important to vote, it's because, at least for me, I think for every person, we have to find the reason why you vote. and it will vary. But I'm sharing my reason for voting is because I grew up seeing that others couldn't. Others could not change the policies and laws that were affecting their day-to-day life. And yet we have the right and we have the ability to vote for people who will change those laws. And a couple years later, what is it, 5-6 years ago, we finally had a bill passed through the state legislature and signed by the governor that enabled people to be able to get a driver's license. Well, that happens because people voted for those leaders. And that's why it's so important to participate, because change does happen, and we can be part of that.
You know what your personal story really does show is the unique challenges that immigrant families have when it comes to voting. You know, there are specific barriers that really and oftentimes are discouraging for new immigrants to want to cast a ballot. Because what it takes is first, immigrants have to obtain citizenship, right? Then they have to learn how to register. And then on top of that, right, is figuring out the American political system, many of which, you know, because they're new immigrants, they really haven't been socialized. They haven't been in the American education system to really understand, right, what this voting process is. And so I think, you know, what's really inspiring about this story really is the also importance of our second generation children of immigrants, right, in helping to show their families and to explain to their families what the importance of their voting, you know, what kind of effect their voting is. And what's really striking to me is this is, you know, a lot of what our research shows, which is that for immigrant families, learning about politics is very different. You know, in families that are native born, that their parents were born in the United States, they went through the American school system. There's what we call a top-down learning process, right, where it's the parents that then train and explain and politicize their children into certain beliefs because they have been in many ways socialized themselves, right, in the American system. But for immigrant families, it's much more of a dynamic process, and it's not necessarily this top-down process, right? Which is that immigrant families really have these experiences where oftentimes the children, second-generation children, who are going through school, right, are learning some of these different connections, are sharing with their families, right, the different policies that are going on, how it impacts them, and they're motivating their families to be more participatory. And I think for all of us at home, to recognize really the importance of what's going on in our homes, right, these conversations that are happening, and the types of roles that we play in our homes as trusted messengers. About what's going on inside the home. But what you bring up, of course, especially when it comes to motor voter, is that there are ways that our government can implement. There are different policies and things that they can implement to help make it easier, right, for us to vote, for us to be engaged. And so could you share with us a little bit about some of the things that the Secretary of State's office has been implementing, in particular for thinking about these special communities that could use more assistance when it comes to voting?
Absolutely. And I would like to expand a little bit more about what you said. Everything you just said it speaks so, it really hits home, especially for me, because you're right, I am a first generation student, and, you know, it did feel like I was very much sharing some of these policies. My mom was very active, and she was very interested and engaged in the policies that were happening through different news outlets, right? But I think I definitely, especially when it comes to propositions, I find myself always meeting with my family and going over what they mean. And that really comes down to, you know, oftentimes we don't have a culture, you know, in the United States or where we grow up, not really fully understanding what it means to vote, not really fully understanding what a proposition is, not really understanding how much a law can influence your direct family. And so I think it really comes down to people, students in particular. I know that there probably should be or will be students watching this, but it really comes down to making sure that you're sharing your experience and what you're learning with your parents and your neighbors and family members. I know that I get calls all the time, but it really comes down to that culture of sharing and of sharing your experiences. And that's one of the things that we're really striving to change, of making sure we create a culture of people being empowered and immersed in our civic and civic engagement and in our democratic process in general. We know that it has to start at a young age, right? It has to become a habit. And not all family members, not all families do that. I knew because we had all of these barriers in my home, in my own home, it was not something that I grew up seeing my family do. But I know for me, as I'm planning, my own family, I'm thinking that is something central that I want to make sure that my family is participatory and understands the importance of voting. So it really comes down to ensuring that we ingrain that culture and we share that culture, or we start that culture if it hasn't started yet. But as to what some of the things that we're working on, we've got a lot. It's a really busy year. In fact, I know that this very moment, the Secretary of State is meeting with county registrars all across California. There's a lot going on today, and there's been for the last few days. We've got we're at 22 days before the elections, and so there's a lot of different things that we've done to try to increase civic engagement and participation with students at the higher education level, but also trying to make it easier for everyone to vote and gain access to their ballot, especially in light of the COVID challenge. So because of COVID, we wanted to make sure that people who may have been at risk had the ability to safely and securely send their vote from home to fill out your ballot. We did not want that to be another hurdle. We've also, I know one of the things that you brought up was automatic voter registration. So about 2 years ago, that went into effect in California. We were not the first state in the nation to do this, but I want to say that we are the biggest, and we have been doing a fantastic job as a state of ensuring that people are able to vote, to register to vote if they want to, or to update their voter registration when they go to a DMV. So now when you go to a DMV, you're asked, would you like to update your voter registration, or would you like to register to vote? Now you pretty much have to opt out. So before it was you had to work to opt in. Now you have to work to opt out, and we wanted to make that and facilitate that process, because we know, and just doing that simple question of changing that dynamic has increased our voter registration by more than 2 million people in just the last year and a half. We're now at 21.8 million people participating and who are registered to vote, and we hope every single one of them will vote. So that's just one of the many tools. We've also expanded through Voters' Choice Act. Not many people know about this because it's not available in every single county, but the Voters' Choice Act enables counties who have participating, some which include Sacramento, Los Angeles, and there's close to about 20 counties that are now participating in the Voters' Choice Act, that they will enable you to have a vote center available, and a vote center and polling locations available for longer. So 11 days prior to the election, these vote center locations will be available for the public to go in, to be able to and vote early. Really, you'd be able to vote early. And in those Voters' Choice Act counties, you can also go in, update your registration, and vote that same day. So there's a lot of changes that have are taking place in California to make it easier to vote. And of course, this year we set everybody in California who is registered to vote received a vote by mail ballot. So if you have not received it, you should be receiving it soon. And we wanted to make sure that everyone, if you haven't received it, make sure that your registration is updated, and you can go on our vote.ca.gov page to make sure you do that, so that your ballot gets to the place that you're currently residing at, and even during this quarantine. So please make sure you do that.
You know, as you're talking about vote by mail, I think this is, I think let's linger here a little bit and talk a little bit about this, because I think that this is a really important change that we've made. But I think it also challenges in some ways the culture of voting. You know, I think there's a lot of people that have really celebrated going to the polling location, I know, especially as a professor of political science, I took my 2-year-old, 2 years ago because I wanted to have the picture and, show my students, that was a cute little picture that we did, but also just because I'm a professor of political science and talk about the importance of voting. Yet there's a lot of discussion about trying to turn in your vote early, right, because of the mail-in ballot. Can you talk a little bit about the, to what extent folks really should be encouraged to vote early because of the fact that we have all this processing going on with turning in your vote by mail, or to what extent can folks feel comfortable waiting right closer to the election? I think especially as we think about, even from an academic perspective, we talk about a lot how elections change over the course of an election. 1 month is a long time in election speak. And oftentimes, voting in October is we're in a very different circumstance, right, than voting in November. So from your office's perspective, what are these trade-offs here in terms of, voting early, which I've seen a lot of commercials encouraging us to do, versus really, in many ways, for a lot of folks who do want to vote in person, but that also means waiting, until Election Tuesday.
Thank you. That's a really great question. The good thing is California has provided options for people, right? That's the one thing we wanted to make sure we provided you with, so that if you really wanted to go in, like I'm one of those people who also likes to get the sticker, right? My I voted sticker is important. I have a ballot, my ballot came in this weekend. And I was just thinking like, I want to go, I'm filling out my ballot, but I'm dropping it in. That's a habit, right? It's a habit of, I'm dropping it in, going to my vote center because I live in Sacramento County. So I'm going to my vote center, dropping it in because I want my sticker. You have that option too. Anybody in California does. You could also, in terms of what you're asking, in terms of timelines, I would absolutely, if your ballot has arrived, please fill it out, please submit it and send it in as soon as you are able to. The more time you give yourself, the easier it will be in terms of tracking your ballot. And that's another one of the tools that I wanted to make sure I shared with you. California has now started a ballot tracking application. So if you go to our vote.ca.gov site, you will be able to sign up for it. And you will be able to see where your ballot is once you've filled it out, and you will be able to track it through the entire process. That is really key and critical, especially if you're voting for the first time. Because as some people may not know, sometimes people forget to sign their ballot. It is critical that you sign your ballot. And if you don't if you don't sign it, it may not be counted. The counties also want to make sure that your ballot signature matches to what we have on file for the state. So we will look at that. And by we, I mean the counties will look at that. And if you track your ballot, you will be able to see if there are any issues when your ballot is submitted or when it lands at the county. And if they have any issues with your ballot, if they're not able to read it, they will contact you and it will show up on this Ballot Tracks app. So please make sure you sign up for it. That's another tool that's critical, especially right now as people are really trying to gain transparency into this process. I know there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there that that your ballot may not be counted if you mail it. If you mail it and it's before and it has and it's postmarked by election day, November 3rd, then your ballot should be counted as long as it obviously your signatures match. You signed it and it is readable. Some people are doing things. I know that I've heard in the last weekend that they're trying to disinfect their ballot by putting it in the microwave. You should definitely not do that because that also will not help to read your ballot. It needs to be scanned, it needs to be processed. So these are things that if you do something to tamper with your ballot, it could hurt it being counted. So please make sure that's one of the tools that I would highly advise the public to sign up for. And just make sure that you're aware that's another tool.
The idea of being able to track our ballots, I think, is an important piece of, unfortunately, I think what's going on today, which is that there's growing concerns of what we call voter suppression, right? And so historically, what we've seen is with demographic change, There are different efforts by different types of groups, elected officials, what have you, really trying to suppress or in many ways discount, in particular, the votes of communities of color, voters of color. We have unfortunately, a long history of this. It is unfortunately becoming headline news, especially with various different things that the presidential administration is disseminating right now. I think this is something that we definitely need to be vigilant for this election, to making sure that there are fair elections. Unfortunately, one of the news stories that I just heard about was that there were some incidents of people putting up fake mailboxes to accept ballots. What have you heard about this, and what are some of the different things that we're trying to do to make sure that everyone's vote really is fairly counted for this election?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, you're very right. That is a reality that we're having to deal with. That is information, and that is a news story that is developing as we're speaking. I know that is something that's one of the reasons why it's absolutely critical that viewers, that voters really make sure that you go to your trusted sources, to your counties, to ensure that you can find the right polling locations, the drop boxes, the vote centers that are authorized by the Secretary of State's office to be able to receive your ballot. That is also on our vote.ca.gov website. You will be able to find the polling locations closest to you, as well as the vote centers and drop boxes. So please make sure that you're vigilant. Unfortunately, that's what it comes down to. Be vigilant with your vote. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And the best way to ensure that you combat that and help us combat that is to remain vigilant, to share. If you see, if you see anything that looks a little out of the ordinary, it doesn't look like it's authorized, then please, you're welcome to tag us on social media. You're welcome to reach out to us via our election hotline and let us know what you have seen. That's one of the best ways that we can combat misinformation together, is by knowing that it's out there so that we can do something about it. That's one of the reasons why today, again, as we're speaking, Secretary of State Alex Padilla is meeting with counties across the state to ensure that they know what our tools are related to polling locations and drop boxes, and again, ensuring that there's some form of communication between the public and our office. So again, that's something that we really just have to be vigilant, use safe and trusted resources like your counties and our office. And you can find that information for the counties even on our vote.ca.gov site.
I think that's I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that's a lot of the questions that we do tend to get, especially for me as a faculty member, effectively kind of how do we make sure there's trusted information? And I think in this case, it really is important for us to refer to our county governments and to the state government in terms of directing us to the right places. So I think I would like to emphasize that for our audience here, that there really are places where you really should rely on for appropriate and correct information.
Yes, and even our partners at the local level, I know that cities and counties are certainly helping us with that. And I know that sometimes even celebrities are stepping up to the plate. This year, California is moving forward with an unprecedented amount of through a communications and outreach and public education campaign to ensure that, again, people who are concerned about voting during this pandemic can do so safely, and also so that you're aware of the changes that have happened in policies in the state law, so that you can ensure that your vote is counted, and also to ensure that you know that tools like ballot tracking exist. So those are all a part of our education campaigns, and I'm hopeful that you will be able to see those and continue to see those in different languages. Also, if you have disabilities, that should not prohibit you from participating in our democracy. So California is moving forward with a robust plan to be able to ensure that every single person who has who needs assistance in voting can do so safely. So please, again, visit our website. The county information is on that website. And we're working with partners, including your cities, local counties, local governments, even some celebrities. And I know this year we've even added some of the sports groups. I know we've been working with NBA to help us with making sure that we are all sharing information that is authorized by the Secretary of State's office. It's really a huge effort, because this is unfortunate that we have to combat misinformation and disinformation out there, but that is the reality that we're facing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we're almost out of time today, but of course, since this is a UCLA connections, I want to for sure, touch on young voters, young adult voters. This is a group, of course, that every year, every election year, we're hoping can have robust and increased engagement. It is unfortunately a low turnout group relative to other age groups in the United States. But nonetheless, I think there are a lot of great efforts out there to try to make sure, and I think hopefully this year will be a year where we see really growing numbers of young adults turning out. Can you share a little bit about some of the things that the office is doing to engage with young voters?
Yes, absolutely. So this is one of the reasons, this is one of the things that I absolutely love to share. So I'm also the director of the California Students Vote Project. And I'm so proud of what we've been able to do with our partnerships throughout California with our higher education universities and colleges. So this year, at this point, we still are a couple of weeks away from the general election numbers, but we started a ballot bowl competition. And this is his second statewide competition of its kind to, again, try to increase voter registration and civic engagement participation at higher educations. And we're weeks away from the general election, and we've already doubled the amount of voter registrations at the higher education system that we had since 2016. And 2016 being the whole year, not just leading up to the general election. So currently we stand up at about 47,000 voter registrations that have been submitted in just this couple of weeks. We started about 4.5 weeks ago for the ballot bowl competition. And since then, 47,000 students across California have used our voter registration, unique URLs for the student voter registration and ballot bowl competition. So it is absolutely, it's giving me hope. It gives us, it's one of the things that I absolutely love to see, because we need that energy, that enthusiasm. We need you to help us change that culture. We need you to talk to your family members. We need you to talk to your neighbors to ensure that people are participating in our general election, are participating in the census. That's been huge, that we've been able to share information with all of these college and university students about making sure that they're participating at all levels, not just in our election, but also in the census, which is going to be wrapping up at the end of this month. And I'm really excited because UCLA in particular is the only university in California that has agreed to do a pre-populated link. So when you do voter registration, when it goes live, and I believe it should be going live in like the next few days. If you haven't seen it yet, you should be seeing it soon. But we've been working on this with UCLA for over 1.5 years, and it is the only campus right now, and it is considered our pilot for the UCs that will allow you, it will present you the opportunity to do voter registration. And if you are eligible, if you meet all of the criteria to be able to register to vote, it will fill out some of those, it'll pre-populate some of that information based off your student information. So we're really excited about it because we are hoping that it is a template for other campuses to follow, and it would really change, I think, those numbers even more so. So we're hoping to, little by little, we've been working since 2016 to try to change those numbers and for student participation, and I think we can get there. And these numbers alone this year are record numbers for us, and so I'm really excited to see where we end up on election day.
Wow, these are really exciting things happening here on the UCLA campus. So that is a wonderful thing to see. The last data, unfortunately, though, that I did see, thank you for bringing up the census. There was a conversation I had probably about 1.5 months ago that unfortunately UCLA had a relative to other UC campuses, had a lower response rate on the census. And so for all of our UCLA audience out there, please be sure to fill out your ballot. If you are a student on campus or you've resided near campus, you can use your campus address, right, as part of where you're supposed to be filling it out. Because if we don't get all of our students counted, right, then UCLA doesn't necessarily get the proper funding and the representation that they need. So thank you, Lizette, for bringing up the census. That also is a great way to segue into some of our resources that we have. So we have a slide here. So our UCLA specific resource is the Bruins Vote campaign. It's bruinsvote.ucla.edu. And Lizette has shared with us our official State of California vote.ca.gov website. So that is a great resource for us to make sure for any of you have questions about your voting locations, where a drop-off location is or a polling center location, please use those to refer to there. And we also have information about the different propositions and stuff, right, on this website as well, right, Lizette?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. In particular, I want to thank you, Lizette, for joining me today in such an important conversation and a critical conversation as we lead up to the election. So just, as we close out, do you have a few final words for our audience?
The only thing I want to say is thank you very much for the invitation for us to be able to have this conversation on such an important topic at such a critical time. We have a couple of weeks left, so please make sure you are, if you haven't received your ballot, make sure you update your registration. Make sure if you are eligible to vote to please exercise that. Find your reason, find your motivation, but please make sure you vote. And then if you have not filled out your census, please ensure your community is counted and that California receives this correct amount of funding by filling out your census. You have less than a couple of days to go. October 31st is the deadline. So please make sure you fill that out. And again, appreciate you inviting me. And I look forward to seeing hopefully a historic amount of participation in the census and then November 3rd general election.
Thank you very much. So just as a reminder to our audience, we have taped this recording, and so this conversation will be able to be rewatched on our ucla.edu/connections website. Please be sure to share this with others. Thank you for joining us today, and happy voting.